Good evening, everyone. Thank you for waiting. A little bit of an impromptu stream, but it's freshly requested, and might as well just bash one out. Oh, I see a white avatar. One moment. Let me. Hopefully that fixed it. We're gonna get a tune started. It's been a while since we've had a tune. Give people a chance to settle down, and it will give me a chance to. No, my avatar is still white. Hold on. It bugs us. So let's see, switching it, and then we'll try switching it back, because today I just want a basic avatar. Right, so the Pikachu works, so hopefully that should rectify the situation. So we'll get a tune started. I'll give me a chance to have my injection. My sugar levels are really high. I had a high carb dinner tonight, and we'll be discussing the topic of, it's a communal based topic, but anyway, let's get a little tune going. So you would think I'd have this a bit more. Right, which one was it? Thank you for listening to that. Oh, feel crap when you have a really high sugar. Anyway, so thinking how to tackle this topic. This isn't to come down on anyone. We need, fundamentally, this will be a conversation of having a bit of appreciation for where people are in their journeys and respecting that where they're at, to try to have a better awareness of the mechanics that are contributing to types of patterns of behavior, and why to some of us we might scratch our head and wonder, why is it you're not moving on, or why do you participate in such things, or why does it seem to be so important to you when it's not so important to other people? It's because of emotional investment and things of that sort. I've touched upon this sort of topic in other, like, I have to go through my library of content. Like, I think one of the videos talks about the dangers of communities. That can kind of give you an example. But we'll try and consolidate some of these ideas into a more generalization of spheres. So we're not necessarily talking about the manosphere or survivor communities, but we're brushing up against the idea of like a group identity and why people congregate in such networks, and the problems therein, which is why this stream is talking about bubbles. Everybody, a sphere is a bubble, the bubble of protection. And it's, you could also think of it as a little bit like a bird's nest, where the young are looked after, protected, they're fed, and they grow, and eventually they should leave that nest. So eventually, hopefully, you want your freedom, you want your independence, you want your individualism, etc. Then really you should be observant of the bubble you're in and not be afraid to venture out. Now, my background, I mentioned it before, but it's worth saying again. I came from what we call the air quote like the narcissistic survivor community. Hence why I talk about narcissism to such a great deal. And I was part of a borderline community at one point as well. You start to see patterns, you start to see things, and the parallels, the comparison is pretty strong, especially when you subjectively break things down into components. So as one might imagine, as one might imagine, you're renting an abusive recovery group support network, survivor, whatever it's called, however it's phrased. You're going to be dealing with people who are disorientated, their emotions are irregulated, there's a lot of instability, there's a lot of processing, a lot of trauma, there's a lot of turmoil, the whole gambit of kind of issues, shall we say. And you get a bunch of these people and you put them together, it kind of ends up, if you're not careful, being like a case of the blind leading the blind. Now, in particular, another video you might want to, excuse me a second, I feel a sneeze coming. Oh, I hate that when you can feel it coming. Hurry up, come here. All right, excuse me. Another video you might want to consider watching is the one titled, damn it, I forgot what it's called. It'll come back. Like a cafeteria. These bubbles, these spheres, these communities, traditionally it wasn't such a problem, but it's becoming more evident in today's culture. And again, we can quickly delve into why that might be the case. But they are essentially becoming feeding grounds for predators, and not just necessarily malicious type of abusive, basically like the narcissist infiltrating, but even low grade or low tier narcissistic, we'll say, individuals coming towards it. So a quick little understanding, when someone says, oh, you're a narcissist kind of thing, that's a bit of a blanket statement, because there are degrees in which someone is kind of narcissistic. If they're a low grade type of narcissist, they won't realize they're a narcissist. They might, in their mind, think they're a saint. They might think they're a goody two shoes. They do everything above board. There's nothing wrong with them. There's no problem here, but it's because they're more of a low grade type of narcissist. These would be the sort of more petulant, obnoxious, loud sort of types of people. Imagine a child, a Karen, a child, a Karen, but in her early years of like teenage adolescence, petulant and stubborn, aggressively stubborn. Like, it's my party, I'll cry if I want to. Then you start going into like a lower mid-grade type of narcissist. These will be a bit more socially not adjusted, but socially aware, that they can't go around just bombastically being vile, because it doesn't work for them. So they try and keep their narcissism a little bit on the down low. They start to have a little bit of awareness that something isn't right, but they're not going to address the issues. They're just going to try and ignore it and brush it aside. Then you start looking into the more mid-range, who are beginning to be a bit more aware of their narcissism. They don't have the word, they might not have the terminology or understanding of what's going on, but that disorder starts, instead of bringing up a cause for concern for them to investigate, more likely they'll always think of themselves like there might be something wrong with me, instead of might start thinking, oh, it's because I'm so special and entitled. That is why I'm different than everyone else. And as we go higher and higher in the tiers of narcissism, they start becoming more cerebral and more aware. It's like, like they acknowledge, yeah, I'm a narcissist, and they enjoy it. It empowers them further. They treat it as a superpower, and they can become more grandiose, more overtly displaying it, more skilled, more calculating, more cunning, and so on. Okay, so we've got that. Now, bring it back to the community. So, with the understanding of narcissists needing to feed on fuel and supply, etc., then if you've got victims and targets retreating into bubbles for protection, you see, so this is where it's like you can't really criticize people living in a bubble. It's a necessity for them to do so. I, like myself, went to bubbles for salvation, for protection, to get the understanding, to learn. So it is a sort of necessity. But you would understand why then, for a hungry narcissist, it's a requirement that they infiltrate. There's no way around it. They have to get in there, otherwise they don't feed. No feeding, you go hungry, you die, you starve. Now, you probably quite often hear, the victim cry bully sort of descriptor being used. So no one's a bigger victim than a narcissist. So it's very easy for a narcissist to penetrate such a community, such as a survivor community, because everyone in there is claiming to be a victim. They've all been on the receiving end of abuse. So a narcissist can just slip in and say, well, hello, everyone, and accuse, project, and say that their ex-partner or whoever, maybe family or whatever, treated them poorly. And to some degree, they could be telling the truth here. But now they're in. And because the majority of the members of these tight spaces, I'm sure many of you recognize that you see familiar names, familiar faces, you get to know people, sort of. And that could be angled in a way that makes the narcissist or infiltrator more accepting or acceptable. Because let's say we've got someone brand new coming in here, but they've managed to love bomb, or they managed to trick or convince another member, a trusted member. Well, they can co-sign and say, hey, everyone, I can introduce you to this new person. Everyone say hi. They're cool. I've spoken to them a bit before. So it doesn't take much skill, in a way, to weasel or worm your way into an area. So with this, it brings up quite a serious concern, because over time, and from what I notice, the emotional strings start to get pulled and exercised. One person might innocently start, maybe they talk anger and rage seems to be quite a popular one, a big cause for concern for people. So we'll use that as an example. So someone in the community space, let's say they're not a narcissist, but they've got the rage. And again, you understand the reasons why, because they've been betrayed, because they've lost their trust, because they've been abused. They have an element of maybe being vindictive. They want some justice. So I'm not faulting anyone being angry. It's actually a natural, normal response to what you've been through. And it's an important one as well, because your anger, in a sense, reveals that despite having a low self-esteem, there is some level of self-esteem. Otherwise, you wouldn't be angry, unless maybe you're angry at yourself. But if you're wanting to sort of stick it to your narcissist or your ex or whatever, even though we shouldn't be encouraging such things, we can work with it, channel that anger in a way, in a more productive way. But it shows that there is energy, and that these things matter. So it's a starting point. But now we introduce let's interject a narcissistic, a vulture trying to prey. They'll be honing in on who amongst the community is susceptible to being, manipulated or excited in some way, and they start to prod and make that angry person even more angry. They start sharing some stories. So this other person, who has most likely poor boundaries, starts to feel enraged hearing the stories of other people's situation. And bear in mind, this is supposed to be a space for people to recover, to heal, to be one with the self, to see the world in a positive way, to move forward productively. And it starts to be revealed that those sentiments take a bit of a back seat. And again, due to the emotional connections, it's not something to frown upon. It's something to appreciate the complexities of what's taking place. So eventually what starts to happen is more and more of these predators come into the space, or not necessarily predators. They might be just misguided, injured, wounded, severely wounded people, and they haven't been taught the best ways of handling things, and instead they've been shown bad examples, like having bad role models. So the company they're keeping is keeping them down, like the crabs in a bucket, for instance. Or you look at, particularly, it seems to be a phenomenon amongst girl groups where one girl will sort of start, it's like Chinese whispers almost, they start to share ideas and bring the entire group down with them. And if one of the members says, hey, this doesn't really fit well with me, I don't feel comfortable with what we're doing, they are isolated, they are shamed, guilt, easy to do. Bear in mind where they're in the emotional state they're coming from. Guilt and shame is a big factor to them, and they're peer pressured into conformity, and bear in mind again, you're in a space that is supposed to be promoting individualism, your independence, and there you are being shamed and guilted to conform and not think outside of the box or independent. Like, shame on you, be like us, we're in this together, we're a sisterhood, we're a brotherhood, we're family. And those sort of words and sentiments are toxified in a way. They are taken out of context, or it's a bastardization of such terminology, because I'm sure all of you would agree that that is not what a sisterhood or a brotherhood or a family is about. It's not about bringing other members that you see eye to eye, that you relate to, and being a detriment to their lives, and not course correcting them, but instead sending them into a spiral of decay and dysfunction. So you can bring in elements of abandonment issues here. Crabs, they don't want to be abandoned, and they feel stronger, even though things are detrimental. They feel like at least I'm not alone. At least I'm going down with other people. So that kind of rationalization makes it acceptable, which would partly explain why people are willing to sacrifice their integrity or bend the knee or long-term become a disgrace, because the transactional aspect is that they get a false sense of security, company, they're not alone, and it reduces their anxieties of fear. But it's obviously it's not really helping anyone. So these communities, from what I notice, they may originate with good intention. They might have a backbone of what you would hope is decency and mental health care and things like that. But without monitoring, without responsible leaders, without executive decision making going on, without being overseen, if they're just left to their own devices, then the inmates take over the asylum. And it was getting, some of the examples I was seeing were getting pretty horrific. So I remember, as part of the so-called narcissist community, recovery community, that one bright spark decided, and it wasn't the first time I heard it either, but they wanted to create a database. They thought, oh, wouldn't this be a great idea that we create a database that we could call out our exes under the sort of guise that this is going to benefit other people, because maybe you never know, you might bump in, like if you go to this database and you're on a date and you see that this person is listed on the database, now you've got a heads up. And it's a terrible idea. I mean, this is a witch hunt, this is slander, defamation, and quite often the narcissist projects, they accuse, I'm not a narcissist, you are. They spin it around. So to me, it's a huge, huge red flag, and makes me wonder what is going on here. That they want to create a database of people who probably are most likely the innocent party. Like they haven't been diagnosed, the person who is auditing this database will be these so-called victims. Like, how on earth are they going to be responsible in that? So it's a terrible idea, dangerous idea, very dangerous. You know, it's very common for the victim to be isolated and accused of being the toxic person in the relationship. So imagine that you've got a website of people who majority are most likely the actual victims, and it's disgusting. Now I mentioned that sort of situation in, I think, the dangers of communities. So check out that video; it goes into more about that. But the other members, many of the people, maybe novice, maybe newbies, maybe sort of none the wiser, are co-signing, going, "Hey, yeah, that would be a great idea. Yeah, because it would have helped me out." So they haven't really thought it through. Some of them might be fellow narcissists and being like, "Yeah, I'll co-sign on that because it benefits them in some way." So you can see how, like, just by definition, you've got a community that's full of what we would call vulnerable people. Vulnerable meaning that they are emotionally, the boundaries are weak. They can be impressionable. They can be very gullible. They could be fooled. You could pull the wool over their eye. They're naive. This is what we mean by vulnerability. And they've got the things like, they have a lot of shame and guilt. So they might do things that are a bit out of character, or might be jaw-dropping to you and I, but they've got this heavy emotional, it's almost like it's on a level of not just exploitation, extortion, emotional blackmail, emotional bribery is taking place. And that is a huge, and the peer pressure and things like that, that's huge. We cannot underestimate how powerful, how strong these sort of links and connections can influence a person, bearing in mind again that they're vulnerable, so they're almost powerless to resist. They are not in control of their own life at this point. They're not in the driving seat. They're still in the nest. They're inside the bubble. You can only be in the driving seat of your life once you leave that nest. You're free to fly whichever way you want to fly under the power of your own wings. So on the one hand, this is why, like with flying monkeys, for instance, or codependents, as dangerous as they can be, it doesn't dissolve them of their responsibility or the accountability. Look at Will Smith, for example. He was powerless. He was almost like a puppet on a string. But it doesn't mean he's not responsible. But we can have a better understanding as to why he was forced to do such a thing. Like this high degree of compulsion that it's almost like an out-of-body experience. Maybe he might have thought later on, like, why on earth did I do that? I can't believe I did it. And it's that kind of thing. It's like, but that's actually a good sign. If you're thinking like that, like, I can't believe I did something like that, that shows someone who is actually thinking a little bit. They got to kind of understand the sort of metaphor of, like, if you don't control your emotions control you. Or case in point, that's basically what's taking place there. So these people aren't in they haven't gone through the maturization process enough to be able to now take the responsibility of controlling their own emotions. So as such, at this point in time, their emotions are going to control them. And until they have that emotional literacy, they're not even going to understand how these emotions are controlling them. This is why anger, going back to the anger point, and rage and hatred can be so intoxifying, because it's in front of the individual. Now, hopefully, with a lot of sort of counseling, therapy, treatment, understanding, and all this sort of stuff, you start to be in front of the other way. You start to bring that anger back, so it's not in front of you. It's not pulling you along. You bring it back. You bring it to where you are. You acknowledge, this is where you get a bit mushy. And you you embrace the anger. You show compassion to your anger. You let it go, and then the anger is behind you instead of in front of you. So it's still there, but it's behind you instead of in front. But this is all part of this emotional literacy and understanding how your emotions play a part in your behaviors, your thought processes, how you conduct yourself, and so on. Why you might do the things that you do. So we can see now that inside a bubble, a sphere, a community where misguided information is proliferating, and without proper evaluation, starts to become popularized. It starts to become normal. It spreads around, and the more vulnerable members of the community will co-sign. It's the false promise, which is more tantalizing than the realization. Like, put it this way: if you're in that kind of position, and on one hand you're given this false promise that, hey, if you conform and do as we say, you'll be accepted. We'll praise you. We'll cheer you on. We'll protect you. You're one of us. You're not going to be alone. And then on the other hand, it's like you stand alone. You defend yourself with the minimal skills that you have at your disposal. None, basically. We're going to shame you. We're going to guilt you. We're going to eject you, deny you, and all the rest of it. Which way would you go? It's not really a surprise that you can see how this misinformation, this bad advice, these bad role models become they appear, the facade appears to be the solution. And it's not until later on, when you think back 3-4 years and you go, hang on, I've been in this space for all this time. What has it actually done for me? And you realize we're basically going in circles here. Now you have regret. Maybe then you might realize, I should have been a bit more independent back then. I should have actually stood up and said no to some of this. I feel there's me fearing being shamed and guilt, but now recognizing what I've actually participated in, I actually feel very disgusted with myself. I can't believe I did that. That kind of sentiment again. So again, this ain't condemning people. This ain't looking down or judging them in such a way. It's actually a relief. It's like, thank goodness. Okay, you've had to go 4 years in a cyclic manner, participating in things that you felt deep down you were uncomfortable with, but you were too frightened to say no to. But okay, you're a slow learner. We could work with that, but at least you're learning. That's another thing to sort of bear in mind. Like, for some people, they're fast learners. Other people, they're slow learners. Other people, it's hard. These concepts are hard to wrap your head around, and so on. So there's lots of variables and factors and influences and all sorts of characteristics to consider, which makes it more disorientating. So again, with all this disorientation, you can see why it would be no surprise if someone says, hey, don't worry, everybody, I've got the answer. Basically, just do as I say, follow me, and I'll sort you out. People will sign over their souls essentially for that. And this is like how cults are formed in a way. So you can see how so going back to the community idea, how over time they can become very bad environments, and now you're stuck because you're in that bubble. You fear escaping. Um, an example you could use would be something like the son husband who is not allowed to leave the nest and is told the outside world is you're not going to survive. The outside world is too dangerous for you. Stay here in this nest and I will look after you. That sort of thing. Um, there's obviously the issue of self-esteem, like where this being derived from, and if it's being outsourced by someone else who is telling you, hey, do as I say, stay in this bubble, don't worry, I will be the source of your self-esteem, I will praise you, I will make you feel good, then you won't need to make yourself feel good. You're dependent, and you're becoming more and more conditioned to be that or codependent. And instead of doing what you should be doing, which is trying to build your own self-esteem for yourself, and what the narcissist is doing is giving you more and more reasons not to do that and to actually hate who you are. So you're being encouraged and rewarded to be something that you're not. So which is why breaking free and having that maturation, this is a mortality. This is a psychological death, and it's a scary thing to do. There's a heavy element of fear involved. The fear of growing up, the fear of no longer being a child, because when you're a child, you're protected, you're nurtured, you're fed, you're clothed, you're kept warm, But there comes a point when it needs to be done. Otherwise, it is no longer. See, as a parent, it is abuse. This is something that's abusive, where you have a child that is growing up biologically. They reach the age of 18. They're 30 years old. They're 40 years old. And the parent, who is now an elderly, is still calling this a grown-up. They're not a child, but they're still calling them baby. Oh, you're such a, you'll always be my baby kind of thing. That's abusive language. Because a 40-year-old is no way a baby, let's say, and that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to make him into a 40-year-old baby, So you need to have that they're not being seen for who they are. They're being seen for something else. And in that situation, they're being seen as a baby, as in inferior, as in beneath me. I'm of the philosophy that when a child reaches that adulthood, you're seeing them eye to eye, really, and it'd be wrong for me to carry on treating them as a child without the independence to make their own decisions for them. So they're an equal, essentially. Like, you're an adult and they're an adult now. Anyway, I digress a little bit there. So going to maybe to make this a bit more relatable to what we're seeing in the men's spaces and this issue of flame content or issues of videos about women all the time. So you don't really quite get that in the narcissist community. You don't really get videos being shared of like, hey, check out this narcissist and let's criticize and critique and shame them and tell ourselves how much better we are of them. So in that regards, the narcissistic community has actually got one up over the, not that this is a competition, of course, but has a little bit of a better practice, for lack of better words, than say the men's spaces. But like I said, it's not a competition. It's not a direct comparison of who is better or not. It's understanding the needs that it serves. Like, so why is that? Now, quite often in the survivor community, they emphasize that, or at least occasionally you'll hear. And by the way, disclaimer: not everyone in those communities are going to be so vulnerable and so narcissistic, and it's just a place entirely full of dysfunctional people. You get people who understand the deep dives, You know, they embrace the darkness, or that their tolerance levels or whatever other kind of characteristics are such that they actually prosper. You survive, you thrive is the kind of motto they have over there. But the numbers are few, and you need to understand also that when in terms of recovery and healing, you know, you're looking at fractions of a percent that will actually do the hard work, the introspection, and actually go the benefit, and, you know, air quotes, like recover, heal, that kind of thing. And I'm sure most of those, that fraction of people will say, yeah, they've healed, they managed to become functionable, you know, they've managed to be able to trust again and all this, but it's come at a cost. They're scarred people, but these wounds have healed, you know. So it's not like there's the idea of a perfected, idealized outcome is a bit of a emotional, silly, infantile way of looking at things. It's more of a case of sorrow or somber, that yeah, I'm lucky I survived. That was the biggest fight of my life, a heavy ordeal. Don't know if I could do it again. You know, I've learned a lot. I've hurt a lot. I've grieved a lot. That's another heavy component to consider for this, grieving. But that aside for the time being. So the few that actually do, air quote, make it, now they've left a bubble. They're on a trajectory in life, right? Point A to point B. They're going somewhere. They might not know where it is exactly, but they're plotting a course. They're finding life out for themselves now. Maybe they'll survive into long age. Maybe they might die the next day. It doesn't really matter. But the point is that they've broken the cycle. And you start to see that for the rest of the people remaining, the vast majority, that this is what it's all about. It's a cycle, the echo chamber, going round and round, rinse and repeat. That is the function. The purpose is to prevent that closure, that trajectory from taking place. Because for the majority, that is another fear of the unknown, fear to grow up. They don't want to do that. It's the Peter Pan kind of syndrome. So how do you stop if life is telling you that you have to go on a course, you have to follow the path, you have to walk the straight and narrow, and you don't want to do that because you're so scared, you don't want to be responsible, you don't want to be accountable, you don't want to have to look after yourself, and instead you'd rather be looked after, then you're going to have to make things cyclic. You're going to have to go around in circles and forever never allow a closure to take place. So as an example, you might say, I've seen videos, flame content, again and again and again and again. I've seen women again and again. It's like, yeah, I know it, or I at least know enough by now, right? So what am I doing here? It's because you have to go around, you know, and be kept like the crab in the bucket. And at that point, like I'm saying, with as a parent telling a child who's 40 years old that, hey, you're my baby still, is abusive, then those who are continuing this cycle to go around, this enabling aspect, is actually hurtful to people. For those who want to stay in that cycle, that delusion, that forever state of infinite, in a way, immortality as well, because when you're on a trajectory, the final destination is what? Is death, right? You're born, that's where you begin. You go through life down a path. Final point, you die, right? So if you don't like that kind of stuff, you fear death, and you don't want to live a life, you're too scared of life, then you're going to live in a delusion. Well, then in a way, you never die. One day becomes the next, and it just becomes a blur. and you don't even realize that 5 years has passed, and all during that time, all you've been doing is watching flame content or roasting videos or things that have been keeping that anger, perpetuating it, fuel it, feeding it, so that it never dies. Because once you become exhausted by it, and this is a good sign, if you become exhausted from what you're seeing, from being angry, now you're beginning to be presented with a choice. What are you going to do about it? You know, it's good to become exhausted in that sense, because then you let go. Then you go, right, it's like F it, yo. I'm gonna venture outside, see what happens. And hats off to you for doing that. But this circular way of going about, one of the ways it is sold as part of this promise of protection. It's like, stay here in this circle, stay here in this bubble, we'll protect you. You live forever, you become immortal, nothing can hurt you. We could just sit here and roast and flame everyone else, call them losers, and make ourselves feel better, and we can kind of have a little ego rub staying here. For the majority of people, that's actually probably the best thing for them. They're just simply not ready. They don't have the tools, they don't have the abilities. The shock of exiting the bubble, it will be so severe that it could send them into a psychosis. So living in a delusion, like the blue pillar, you don't unplug a blue pillar because it could be so traumatic you might end up killing them. They have to kind of do it for themselves. So this cycle is a alternative way of coping with the stresses of reality. And it's kind of sad because it shows the desperation that there aren't many tools in the tool belt, that this is basically what has come to be the way of regulating our emotions. And it's not a good way of regulating emotions, but it provides a pseudo form of stability. Like on one day we could be angry, on the next day we can be laughing at those beneath us, and on the following day we could feel good about ourselves, and then the day after we're back to being angry. So that kind of cycle of negative emotions, and the toxicity, the levels increase. And backtracking a little bit here, if you bear in mind, like, these people are asleep at the wheel. This is kind of like subconscious behavior, like zombies. They don't even realize they're doing it, and this is why years could pass and they don't really notice. It just becomes a blur. The only consistent thing that's been happening during that time is this sort of dark negativity that's been festering inside. And instead of sort of wanting to address this, to cleanse yourself, as it were, they kind of double down, forms of doubling down. They might deny ever being like that, or they sort of sign off and be like, so be it, then this is the way I'm going to be in life. I'm going to be a miserable guts. I'm just going to be a troll. I'm going to be an arsehole, or whatever it is. And tough titties to the world, they're going to have to deal with me because I ain't going to make any changes. And you see that kind of stubbornness, that lower grade narcissism we were talking about at the very beginning. That lower grade starts kicking in, where it's like screw you, this is the way I'm going to be, either like it or lump it. You're going to have to accept me for who I am, because I ain't going to change, because whatever. So it's not very nice to see. And you can see how damaging it can be for a community. And for those who actually mean well, they're forced. When they have that realization of what's taking place, they'll quickly leave, because they'll be like, I mean, it'll be insane not to at that point. But they'll be so uncomfortable that this is when they'll probably decide to go no contact or go their own way or disengage, as it were. And usually they feel relief initially. They feel from being exhausted, they can now feel the gravitas of that exhaustion. They're like, wow, whew, I feel like I've been in a coma or something. It's like, Jesus, I feel depleted. My energy, and that's another, because you have been depleted. To keep that cycle going round requires you to put your energy in. This is the fuel that is keeping it circulating. So it is draining. It is taxing. It will disintegrate your health long term. Because you're not looking after yourself. The self doesn't even exist in this entangled whirlpool of emotions. There is no individualism here, and this is why you see, like, it's hard to see personality in a way, because one person becomes the other. The enmeshment, the lack of boundaries, they just blur in this cesspool of emotions and damaged and injured people. So it is soul consuming. It's self-destructive, as described as a heavy characteristic of Nas. Survival, self-defense, self-destructive mechanism. And so, going back with this, a narcissistic survivor recovery group, quite often what I ended up seeing were the members of that community who really stood out. I wouldn't be surprised if they were even more narcissistic than the people they were accusing abused them. It was utterly disgusting, and every bit the reason which I thought to myself, I'm not staying with these people. The exposure, the proximity is not going to be good for myself. So adios, and it's that sort of realization which could save your life. Not to be melodramatic. For some of you in a man's space, for example, maybe that might be, you have decisions to make. Like you have friends, for example. And like I was saying before, depending what kind of interactions they are, they might use guilt and shame, or maybe blackmail, to try and keep you there. But you need to understand that's even more reason why you need to hit the ejector seat button and get the hell out of there. They're relying on your fear and your weakness as a result of vulnerability for you to cave in, to buckle under the pressure and be like, okay, maybe I should keep my mouth shut and just do as I'm told. And it's that sort of complicit act that we see that on a wider societal level. Look at the normies that will just wear the face mask or take the jab. Why did they even bother think about it? No, because I'm just going to stick my head ostrich in the ground and just do as I'm told because I'm a good little lamb and I fear the repercussions and all the rest of it. But now they got buyer's remorse, but it's a little bit too late. So this is where you start to, luckily for men, there's a lot more, I believe, stoicism, integrity. There's a lot more dignity. They're a bit braver. They could be a bit more willing to take the risk, because they've had to burden having to do things on their own throughout centuries of history. They haven't been coddled to such an extent as socialists have. And you can see why the socialists are so together, not because they share principles and values and morals and things like that. It's because they have a dependency. Dependency is the glue that binds them, and it's like shackles. They're chained up to one another. There is no key. So if one of them has some sort of stupid idea, like glue themselves to a motorway carriage, it should be no surprise why the rest of them will follow. They don't have a brain cell between them, and it's not nothing to do about logic. This isn't a logical move to make. This is an emotional one. So this phenomena that we see in, make it pertinent to the viewer, the majority of the viewer base here, like the men's spaces. When you think about not necessarily the actions that they're doing, but the needs that have to be served, you can have a better understanding of why it's taking place and why in some ways it needs to take place. This isn't something you can just stop and say, everybody stop being angry. It ain't gonna work. Stop watching flame content. That's not gonna work either. Stop roasting people. It ain't gonna work. Because your logical decision, your logical recommendation cannot override the emotional necessity of doing it in the first place. If they didn't have that compulsion, they wouldn't be doing it. You wouldn't need to tell them to not do it. They would come to that realization for themselves that, hey, this isn't benefiting me. I've got other options and I'll be doing that instead. So you're not really enlightening them when you tell them that. I mean, you could say it to your black and blue in the face directly, eye to eye, and still they depended. It kind of depends on how emotionally bankrupt they are. Maybe that's a bit of a mean way of putting it, but how emotionally, ooh, you get what I'm saying? Like how emotionally dependent, I guess, they are. That it's not that easy. I'll give you an example with my kid who's autistic, right? She has a meltdown. She's screaming. She's pretty much smacking herself in the face or hitting her own legs, kind of thing. She convulsions, shaking around. She's stomping her feet, screaming the house down. That kind of thing. And this is a scary thing that she said during this meltdown recently. This is becoming more a go-to expression. She'll say that it's for. I'm giving myself the chills here just thinking about it. It's nightmarish for me. But she'll say like, "Daddy, help me! I can't control it." And fuck, man. Excuse me. Shit. Because do you think she deliberately wants to be like that? No. It's, I could say calm down. I could say breathe. Like whoa. It doesn't really. It's not going to stop. You have to kind of find it. There are other ways and other techniques. But if I was to just shout at her and be like, "Stop doing that," that ain't gonna. That, as if it was her choice to be like that. That just makes her feel even more like she's at fault. Like I'm blaming her for doing that instead of being sympathetic. And it's terrifying, Obviously, she doesn't enjoy it. obviously, I can only begin to imagine how scared she is when that happens to her, and how powerless like, never mind how powerless I feel, but how powerless she feels. You know, and it's this sort of out of body, like when she does calm down and I can see her eye to eye, like maybe she might smile, like there's tears and she's exhausted. You know, I say, like, there you are, I can see you, like, I see your essence, I see your soul, because it's welcoming, it's a relief. It's like welcome back, honey, you know, like good to see you. You had me worried there, like it's almost like a possession, like an exorcism or something like that. And so this is why we can't be angry with people for having to do the things that they do, because would if they were aware, or if they have other ways of managing, maybe they could utilize that. But if this is all they've got, and then you want to condemn them for having this only way of dealing with it, then that in of itself isn't really helping them. It's not necessarily about finding the way, the path. It's about finding, oh, excuse me, I've had this on the screen all this time when really I had a picture I was going to have in the back. It's about finding a way, something that works. You know, this is why this idea of perfection, get it out of your head. It will be your undoing. Life doesn't need to be perfect. There doesn't need to be an idealization. Just as long as it's good enough. Just as long as, like, do you really think my kid is going to have an air quote normal life like you and I? No. But if she can have a good enough life, it's good enough for me. It's good enough for her. As far as I consider, I would consider that a good life. In some ways, maybe a better life, because it hasn't got the additional kerfuffle that we like to embellish ourselves with, because we attribute some kind of virtuous value to it, as we pretend it's necessary when maybe it's not. So yeah, this is the picture I wanted to show. There we go. Living in a bubble, hey? You know, and oh, it's a pretty little bubble. Why would you want to pop that? So I think that's pretty much what I just generally wanted to show that this phenomena isn't necessarily anything unique. We see it in various shapes and forms, in most communities. These communities, especially in modern times, the way they're being structured is in this kind of world. It's this perpetual machine to keep it going, to keep feeding this beast, keep it alive. We can't have it stop, because the bubble will pop. So whatever keeps it going, whether it's going to be roasting people, whether it's going to be shaming people, whether it's going to be more of an activist, glue ourselves to the tarmac, or throw paint on pictures, or flat earther, or truther. It's got this it's got this underpinning emotional requirement that says, keep it going, regardless of the evidence, the empirical evidence, the facts, the statistics, the objective reality truth. it doesn't matter. You cannot beat this. You can only escape it. And which is why they say, like, if you're arguing with a narcissist or you're debating a narcissist, you've already lost, because you're participating in that fantasy. Refer to the video about your participation in the shared fantasy, and I'll explain more about that. So take that to the manosphere, for example. You want to debate women. You want to showcase women and dissect their talking points. You've lost. What are you doing? You already know what you need to know. That their lips are moving, that they're lying immediately. So why are you entertaining it? You're in there, even though you might not directly be talking to them, unless it's an actual debate, you're on a panel with them. But regardless, you are still interacting with the representative of the narcissist. As a case in point example, okay, so go back. I'll use the narcissist recovery as an example. When you truly decide to go no contact, to get rid of that narcissist out your life, the recommended thing is you get rid of the pictures. If you have any particular fond movies you've watched together or particular songs you used to listen together, you stop watching and you stop listening to that music. You sever all memories that you have. You let the narcissist die, because otherwise they live inside your head. And if they're inside your head, the narcissist still lives. They still occupy that space. They still have the infection is still influencing you in some shape or form, to some degree, and you need to sever that tie, that psychological bond that you have with the narcissist. This goes beyond life and death, so even if the narcissist were to actually die, but you still carry the memories, and you in such a way that you actually celebrate these memories. Like every time it's the narcissist's birthday, you remind yourself, oh, today is the narcissist's birthday. Then you're doing yourself a disservice. And this is going back to, if you're not careful, like maybe it's partly as a result of not thinking highly of yourself enough, that you put the narcissist before yourself. And instead of just thinking that what day is it today? Today is Monday. You go, oh no, never mind Monday. It's actually the narcissist's birthday today. What good is that doing you, other than reminding you of something that you're trying to get away from? So you sever all these. It's a little bit of that kind of like forget and forgive. You could talk a few. You could bring that into the conversation if you want to, but the point I'm trying to convey over is that if you got anything that connects you, not just physically, assets or whatever. Apart from the kids is always a tricky one because of like co-parenting, but you stop fueling the things that make you unhappy. It sounds kind of quaint. It's a simplified version of a way of putting it. And then you start to ask yourself, why is it you're fueling? Why is it you don't want the narcissist to die inside your head? Why is it you kept a nice little cozy room for them to live in there, like a residency inside your skull? And this is what the guys are doing when they're doing these roasting videos, or when the guys are mocking women, especially at this point where it's like, you already know enough. You already know what you need to know. So what are you doing, really? Why are you hurting yourself like in such a way? And is that, again, it's not to ridicule them. It's to ask these bigger questions. It's like, something is going on here. It's important for you to not abandon. I mean, it's Stockholm syndrome. You don't want your abuser to leave you alone, empty inside your own skull, because you fear that it's going to be an empty place, cold, dark, and solitude. As much as you might preach about living a monk lifestyle, but there you are, you're not really a monk, because you've kept company inside your mind, and the company you've chosen to keep isn't one that actually cares about you in the slightest. It doesn't make sense. What's going on? So severe levels of pain, trauma. And that's not to be all glum and doom and gloom, like you're stuck with this tenant you can't evict. You can. You'd start to look towards your inner child. That is who you should have a room. If you must have a room for someone, at least have a room for that inner child. Introduce yourself with them. Another important point I would like to bring up while we talk on this aspect is this idea of relationships, where you say, my previous relationship was with a narcissist. Wrong. You call that a relationship? Is this what you define as a relationship? More likely, a more accurate way of putting it is that you don't know what a relationship is, because whatever that was that with that person you were with, is that what you want to call as a relationship? Not for me. I mean, sometimes they call it an entanglement, but it's more appropriate in a way. It's not a relationship in the slightest, like whatever it is. A relationship, two-way street, and the narcissist doesn't work like that. It works in transactions. So one-way street. You give, they take. So for a lot of people, now that could be quite a daunting one. It's like, damn, all this time I thought I had relationships with people. I realize I don't even know what a relationship really means. So you never know. Maybe one day you might decide in the future, well, I'm willing to actually find out what a relationship is for the very first time. And maybe with a new definition, it won't be what I experienced before. It doesn't mean you go simping. It doesn't mean you go throwing yourself into the dating market. It just means that you can't have this brush of a statement that you apply to everything in life, because you haven't got the energy or the effort to actually go through to be more to clarify, to expound upon these ideas. When you've got vulnerable people, survival minded, they're in survival mode, then they got to make quick decisions. So it's quick and easy to be like, you know what, just no to this demographic of people. We're just going to say no, and we're going to witch hunt and just slap a label on them, because it's lazy think. And unfortunately for the survivalistic minded person, whose life is in crisis, they might not realize it or want to acknowledge it. It's that shorthand form of thought processing. It's lazy, and it's insensitive, and doesn't really allow you it doesn't allow you the freedom in a way or the reap the benefits of delayed gratification and actually having a proper life for yourself. Because when you shortcut things like in that kind of fashion, and you in a slapdash manner, you start to box yourself in. You limit yourself. It's kind of funny because those people like to be unlimited, lack of boundaries, but with the way they go about doing things, they actually restrict themselves, which is why, going back to the narcissist as a comparison, over time, see, the narcissist, one of their tactics is that they love to put people in we call it a double bind. It's like damned if you do, damned if you don't. This is like a double win for the narcissist. Aha, there's nothing you can do. I win, you lose. But what ends up happening is eventually the narcissist ends up putting themselves in a double bind. They get tangled in their own web of lies. you know, and it's easy to see that one with the lies because they have to keep on top of these lies all the time. A lie overlaid on top of another lie over another lie. The whole life is a fabrication of lies. It gets hard to manage. Easy in the beginning, works very well in the beginning. Not very, you know, there's only a few lies here and there, little fibs and little white lies or whatever. But it comes back, like karma comes back and haunts them. And although they deflect the accountability and responsibility and all the rest of it, you know, when they're tangled in their own web and all the prey and victims have fled, bridges have been burned, even though they still blame people, but they've got no one else to blame but themselves, you know. And so this is more, I suppose the lesson here I'm trying to convey over it is that even more reason why it's important at some point to venture outside the bubble. Like, life ain't gonna kill you that easily. You'll be surprised, you know, like you survive a day at a time and you go, wow, you know, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. And you build up the stamina, the endurance, and you realize that, you know what, the biggest hurdle, the biggest obstacle I had was my own doubt, my own self-doubt telling me that I can't. It's actually kind of easy. It's actually kind of, you might even laugh at it at some point and be like, I can't believe I made such a big deal out of doing that. If I just got on with it, you know, save myself a huge amount of headache, procrastinating, ruminating, the anxiety and stress. Which reminds me, that's another factor I didn't really cover in this stream. But when you're dealing with PTSD, you know, anxiety, stress, trauma, and things like that, that conditioning, you become hooked. It becomes, well, kind of, I suppose, glossed over it. Like you learn, you start to develop it as a form of self-soothing and cope, because it's familiar, and when you're familiar with something, you become comfortable. When you're comfortable, you lower the anxiety because you feel safe, even though the things that are making you feel safe are negative emotions. At least to you, this is family. Like, you don't want to get rid of your anger because anger's been your best friend. It's been your brother or something, or your father or something. What are you going to do now that you don't have anger? Like, now you have to love yourself. Oh man, no. I spent my whole life hating myself. Why would I want to do that? So it's, sorry, I'm making light of things that are esoterical or whatever. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling on. I think there's a lot there to think about and to consider. Any comments you want to take off to another tangent, you know, you can always contact me. Hope everyone in the chat's been behaving. I see. Okay, I'll give some quick shout outs. So we'll go. All right. Who was here in the beginning? I don't know. Iridium, Mandy. Right. Tim's here. MGTV. Hey, cheers for those videos. Always a nice break and relief. Silver Bullets here. Mita Outlaw, great to see you here. Great streaming you've been doing recently. Mr. Hemi's here. Bullets is here. Hope dinner was nice for your parents, I think. Big Red Eyes Productions. Ooh. Oh, there is actually a question. Wait, what's the quickest way to bypass emotion and force logic? Oh. To bypass the emotion and force the logic. The quickest way? You keep your mouth shut. Let them kind of like, let them punch their own face. Yeah. Not sure if that's a very helpful answer, but especially in terms of the emotional part of it, like how do you bypass the emotion? You kind of not to sound rude, like the emotional sort of diarrhea. You let it sort of spew out, and you go, okay, all right. You remind yourself, like, don't don't get sucked into it, because a lot of the time, go back to that video, participation, your participation in the shared fantasy, is these emotions are invites. It's like if I cry my heart out to you, can I get some sympathy from you? Are you willing to hand over a bit of your attention? Hmm. Or that didn't quite work. Or maybe I'll use a bit of injustice and say how wrong this is. Has that sparked your interest? Can I entice you that way? And then boom, I've got you. Peng is here. I don't know if I've already said Peng is here. GM is here. Good to see you, madam. Yeah, okay. I think that's pretty much it. If I haven't mentioned you, I apologize. So thank you all for listening and being here and having the attention. I hope it's given something to think about. Try not to be judgmental. Try not to be condemning. Try not to fault people for doing things they feel that they need to do, or they feel is important or a necessity. To some extent, it's actually it's fulfilling a need. There are requirements, and in some shape or form, it's a way of trying to cope and address it. Might not be the best way, it might not be how you want to do it, but for them or whoever, this is how they've ended up in that kind of situation. So with the understanding and appreciation, we can navigate ourselves better and make better decisions. We need to slow ourselves down in order to be able to think. Otherwise, you're just headstrong, lazy think, and you're just gun-ho and wild, essentially. So slow down, think, reconsider, contemplate, self-reflect, all good practices. And they say it for a reason. So you need to actually do it. No pussyfooting around, unfortunately. Yeah. So I hope that helps. Thank you for watching. Till next time, any comments, whatever, I appreciate it. Hit a like, hit the subscribe, and all that good stuff. And get out of here, enjoy yourselves, live your life.